Okay, I'm assuming you can see my screen. All
Yep.
right, so I put some resources on the the page for today's session. So what I added, there's the file I'm working from, so you can go back and look at that if you want to try something out later. I also have a link to a website where you can create 360 images. I find that a lot of times people one is they don't have a camera to create 360 images, so they're not using the 360-degree image feature, and so they don't have any images. So if you want some stock type images, you can go to that website, and it's, you can pay for it, but there's some free options. I created a few images yesterday. That's what we'll be looking at. So you've got download up there as well, so you can look at the file. I included a couple images so you can practice, and then we'll go through this. What I'm going to do is assume you've never worked with a 360 image, and we'll just go through like, how do I get a 360 image on there? But I'm not going to go through every possible thing you can do. And then what we'll do is look at what this person was asking in the community, and we'll kind of look at a few different ideas on how you can approach this. So if you've never used this 360-degree image, we're going to come up here, and you can see you can insert that. So I'm going to click on that, and the 360-degree image is going to look weird if you've never. It's not going to look like a regular image, right? Because it's designed to kind of wrap around. So I have this office image, and then I'm just going to insert that. So it's just like inserting an image. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is this 360-degree image, the way it operates inside a storyline. It's like a second app inside a storyline. So when I click on this right here, this edit image, that's going to open up the area where you can manipulate and work with the 360-degree image. So now you can see I can move my image around. There's a lot of things you can do. I posted a link to the training we have on this, but for today, we'll just do a few simple things. So I'm not going to go through every possible thing you can do with the 360-degree images. But the idea is, you can walk around this or navigate it this way, right? It's kind of in a 360 degrees. And then generally people will put things on there, like you can put markers, which you have here, right? You can insert a marker and you can insert a hotspot. And then there's things you can do. And again, I'm not going to go through all the details of what you can do, but that's generally how it works if you've never worked with that in the past. And so then the question in the community was, I've got this series of slides and I've got these images here. I want to connect them. So how do I connect them? And then the other thing is, as they're going through, let's imagine this was like a workplace thing and I had to identify hazards, and maybe there's a hazard here with this electrical outlet, or maybe there's a hazard over here with this TV's not mounted properly or something like that. So I would go through here, and it's kind of like a scavenger hunt or one of those escape room type activities, and I'm going to identify or look for things. And then let's say I clicked on this as a hazard. What I wanted to do then is display that, like have some sort of trophy case or badging system where I could show the learner, okay, you collected one of these things or identified one of these things. So that was a challenge in the community. Is I've got a series of images over slides, and then I want to have this progress meter or this badging system, trophy case, whatever you want to call it. I want to have that available so the person can see what they've collected. So we're going to go ahead and look at what they were doing, and then I'll just throw 3 ideas out there. One of the things with, that's not what I wanted to do. Let me just save and close this activity. I thought it was shutting down Storyline. So one of the things, is with Storyline, there's always a number of ways you can approach things. So you may have a different approach to this. So these aren't the exhaustive ways to approach this. So in this case, we've got these 2 images here, right? And so what I did, just to kind of set it up, I've got these images in here, and then inside the image, I just put a link here. So I create a hotspot in the door. Then if we look at the trigger here, the door is going to jump to the next slide, which is the this slide right here, right? The storage room. And then inside the storage room, I did the same thing here. I have a hotspot that jumps to that office slide. So let me close this. So if I preview this scene, let me delete the slide I created. Okay. Sometimes Storyline gets bogged down with the videos display thing. All right, so we've got the two slides. So if we preview this scene, the way the person had it, they had a series of slides, right? So they have the office slide and the storage slide, and disregard the stuff on the screen here. But as I am in here, I can navigate from scene to scene, right? So that's the way they built it within the series of slides. So if you're going to do something like this, the challenge is if I have a progress meter, how do I, or this badging system or bar, whatever you want, a trophy case, whatever you want to call it, if I have that, how do I display that so it's persistent? So there's a lot of ways you can approach this. So I'm going to show you how I would do it. One way you could approach this is if you had a series of slides, you could create a light box slide, and the light box slide is what you use to display your badges. So what you can do then is, like in this case, you can see I just called it badges, but you can say progress meter or treasure chest or whatever you want to call it. When I click on badges, this opens up a light box slide on the player. And so I can then see what I collect. In this case, I just have some gibberish in here, but that's one way to approach that. And so what you would do is you would create a means to track that. And we'll look at that in a few minutes here. But you'd create a means to track it, and you'd create a slide, and then you'd put the icons or whatever it is that you're tracking, and how you're tracking it's going to be set up in a second. But you would create a means to track and display that, and you put it on a slide. And then what you would do is go into the player here. And my player is opened up on the other screen. And so you come into the player here, and then you can see I've got my badges link here. To do that, you just click on the toolbar icon here to add a toolbar icon. I'm going to click on it, and that opens up this player tab, and I can title this, and we'll call it trophy, right? It doesn't really matter what you want to call it. And then in here, what do we want this trophy link to do? What we want to do is show a light box slide. So it kind of isolates a slide on top of the player. And then we'll select our slide. We'll select this one I call trophy, hit OK. And then you can see there's that link. And I'll turn the badges one off that I created earlier. So now if I hit OK, and I preview this scene, whatever I'm doing to indicate my tracking, in this case we're doing it on a slide, if I click the box here, this will always show it. So that's one way. If you have a series of slides and you want to have a persistent trophy case to show, putting it on the player is one way to do that. You would just use a light box slide. Now if you're doing something like this, then you would go into player settings and turn off the trophy. Like I don't want to have the trophy available on the player, so you would just go into the player settings and hide that. And that's just a matter of, again, going into the player. And then when you look at your menu on the player, it's going to show you what you have as a side menu. Most likely, again, it depends on how you build your course, but most likely if you build an escape room type activity, you're probably not going to want the menu. It just depends on what you're building. But if you did have the menu and you don't want this trophy, because this is the light box slide, you don't want people to see that, then what you could do is hide that from the menu. So you just select it here, and then you go to delete here in the trash can icon, click on it. It doesn't delete the slide, it just deletes it from the menu. There are other implications you have to think about, like the navigation. Usually I put a light box slide in its own scene, so this way you don't get there by mistake. Like if I deleted it on the player, that doesn't mean it's deleted here, right? So if this slide has a next button on it, it's going to go to this trophy slide, even if I hit it on the menu. So you'd have to think about navigating to and from the slides. But that's one way to do this. And so you have the 360 images, you have a series of slides, and then you can do it persistent. This way you don't have to worry about how do I get this overlaid on every single slide. Now what I would do is I wouldn't build this in a series of slides. What I would do is I would build it out as a single slide with a series of layers. And then I'll show you two options you have. So in this one, I just call it the overlay. And so if we look at that, you can see here, I've got two layers. So I created a layer that's my office layer. This is my warehouse layer. And then this is my progress layer. And so again, I kept it really simple, but I've got this little progress bar. So if we preview this slide, what we're going to do is we're going to overlay. So this is my start screen. I go into the layer, the first layer. You can see I've overlaid this progress slide layer on top of this layer. So if this is layer 1, then this is layer 3, right? So this is my office layer, but you can see this bar here, or however I want, it's really big, right? I wouldn't make it this big in real life, but so you can see that it's persistent, right? Now in this case, I have this thing here where I have to collect the TV. So watch what happens when I collect the TV. Now I've indicated that on this icon. So I'm going to go to the next layer. Again, I have a thing that jumps to that warehouse layer. As you can see, I put a little indicator on there. So it's going to jump to the warehouse layer. When I go to the warehouse layer, you can see the layer is not persistent. So we're going to build that now so you can see how that works. So we want that layer, that progress layer, to be on this layer as well. So this is where it's a little nuanced when you're working with the slide layers. And this isn't a beginner's tip, right? So if you're, like David was saying, if you're just getting started, this is probably a little more than you're gonna do when you first start with Storyline. That's why we have the recordings that I put in there for the how to work with the 360 images. I'll put the one in there for true false variables, but that's also the one David talked about coming up. So if you're just getting started, just kick back and watch what we're doing. Don't worry about learning everything, because this is a little bit more nuanced. So what we have is we have a slide layer on the warehouse, right? And let's go ahead and create an icon. Maybe in the warehouse, you have to find a box, right? So I'm going to come over here. We'll go ahead and create a box icon for our progress meter. So I'm going to go to Insert up here, and then we're going to insert an icon. I'll just choose box. We'll find something that works for us. I'll just assume this one works. One of the challenges is making sure it's a single image and not a grouped image. And good, it's a single image. Nope, it's a grouped image. That's actually a good bonus tip. See how this icon here, I don't know how well you can see on the webinar, but it just looks like a drawn line, and this one looks like a grouped objects. Some of the icons, like the TV icon I downloaded, is a single image. This box is actually made up of a series of images. So I don't want to use that, so I'm just going to delete that, and let me just insert. I'll just insert a shape, but just for our time here, we'll just say this is our box shape, right? It's actually works pretty well for us. So we have a box shape. And what I did on this icon is I have like my not selected state and then my normal state. So then you can see I also have my initial state set up to not selected. So we'll do the same thing here. So we'll make this, we'll create a new state here. And I'm just going to create a new state, and we'll just say it's not selected, right? You can, again, you can title these things anything you want. And we're going to make it gray here. I'll just use this gray so we can see it, right? And so we're going to say done. So our initial state is going to be not selected. And I just do this kind of ghosting. I'm making it a little brighter for our webinar today, but I'll do this ghosting so you can kind of see that there's something that should be there. It looks better, I think, than like just an empty square. And so we've got our box here. And what we want to do is we want to change the state when you found the box. So I need to do a few things. One is I'm going to create a variable to track whether I found the box or not. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to create a variable. And that's right over here. So I'm going to create a new variable. Again, just watch this if you're not familiar with using variables or anything like that. So I'm going to create a variable, and we'll call this, box. We'll make it a true false variable, and the initial state will be false, or initial value will be false. So the box variable is just tracking what we're doing. So our initial value is going to be false. When I find the box, I'm going to change that to true. And then once I know the box is true, I can have a trigger that says change the state of this box to normal when that box variable changes. And that's how we then do the tracking. So now what I'm going to do is just put a trigger here. And if we look at how I did it here in the office, I have my TV, so I used a hotspot here. And then I have a trigger that says set the TV variable to value true when the user clicks on this TV hotspot. So that's the same thing we're going to do over here. So let's go to the warehouse, and we'll just put a box here. Oops, that's not what you want to do. We're going to open it first, and then we're going to drag this around. And let's find this box by the door. This is the one you need to locate. So I'm just going to use a hotspot. And again, there's some settings and things you should do with this hotspots, but we're not going to worry about all that for right now. I just want to get rid of the label though. So if we look at the hotspot, you can see here, I'm going to turn off the label. So I have my hotspot. What I want to do is put a trigger on this hotspot. First thing I want to do is title this though. And so this will be, we'll call it our box hotspot, right? And then what I want to do is put a trigger on here. So I'm going to come up here. And what is the trigger? Well, the trigger is I want to change that variable from false to true because I found the box, right? So I'm going to adjust my variable right here. And then I'm going to set here, we're going to find our variable, which is down here, box. It's the one I created. And we're going to set that to the value of true when user clicks the box. Hit OK. So now what's going to happen is when I click the box, find it right here, when I click it, it's going to take that variable that currently is false and it's going to change it to true. Now I can hit save and close. Now on our progress meter, what we want to do is we want to change this when that variable changes. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put a trigger here, and I'm going to change the state of that cube or box, I guess it's cube right here, and we're going to set it to normal. Well, when do I want to set it to normal? I'm going to set it when variable changes, and then I just have to select my variable, go do box. It's only going to change to true, so I could put other conditions and things in there, and again, we won't go into a lot of detail, but we'll go ahead and hit OK. And so we can see right now on this progress bar, we have two triggers. One is to set the box to true or to normal when that box variable is changed, and here's one to set the TV to normal. So now if we preview this scene, what's going to happen is, and there's one thing I didn't do, which we're going to see, hit start, I'm in the office looking for stuff, I click on here, oh, I found that. I would keep searching, right, and then find other things. Then I'm going to come over here, go here, and all right, well, wait a second, where's the progress meter? Is the first thing, like, where's that trophy case? I'm going to click on here, and let's see what happens. So if I come back to here, you can see it's not working. Let's go ahead and go to our progress meter and figure out what we need to do. So first thing is, let's make sure the progress meter is going to show when we're on the warehouse. So what we want to do is come to the warehouse. This is where it's a little nuanced with the layers. If you go into your slide prop or your layer properties down here, by default, the layer properties, when you select one layer, it turns all the other layers off. So it's by default, it says hide other slide layers, right? Now, I want the progress meter, progress bar here to always show. So on that layer, I'm going to click on I'm going to deselect the hide other slide layers. So this way, when that's there, any other layer that's showing will be available, right? Now, when I get to warehouse loads up. I want to show, because warehouse is automatically set to hide the other layers, but then I want to show the other layer, that progress layer. So I'm going to put a trigger on here, and I'm going to say show layer progress, and then we'll say when the timeline of this layer starts. So scroll down here, when the timeline starts of this layer. So what's going to happen is if I'm toggling between office and warehouse, it's going to turn, office is going to turn the warehouse layer off. It's not going to show these layers, but I want to show progress layer. So by allowing progress layer to show all layers, and then when I have the warehouse layer, those two layers can be stacked, and you'll see how that works now when we preview the scene. And so I can jump, and you can see this layer is always loading, because this loads up, and then this layer loads up on top of it. So even though I move around, I have this persistent layer. So that's a nice way to do it. You can jump back and forth, and you have there. The other thing then we need to do is make sure this variable is working. So what we want to look at is figure out why that didn't work for us. So first thing we need to do is make sure our trigger's right. So we're going to come over here. We're going to set box to the value true when the user clicks on box. So that should be working right. And then we're going to come over here. We're going to set the state of Q1 to normal when box changes. And that should work. All right, so let's see. And it's the same trigger that we have here. Let's go ahead and preview this scene. Click in here. We'll find our TV. That changed. Come over here. We're going to find our box. And that changed. Now you notice how this changed here. I don't know why I did that. That variable didn't change. I must have something wrong with the trigger. Set icon to normal. Well, why did it set icon to normal? This should. Stuff always happens when you do it. It was working right. I don't know what I probably overwrote a trigger here. So let's troubleshoot this real quick. This is how you troubleshoot these things. So we know that the icon's changing when I click here, right? So it's setting it to true. So I think what's happening is when I reload the layer, it's not saving that state. And then I think because that layer is loading with that thing in the not selected state, then it's just resetting it to not selected. So there's a few ways you could do that. You could work with the triggers. We're going to try the layer first here, and we're going to go to the layer properties. And what we're going to do when revisiting, we're going to say resume saved state, and that should be the saved state. So let's test that. The other way, you would have to set a trigger to make sure it's evaluating if it's still true. So let's just do that. All right. And you can see there it's working. So there's a lot of nuance with these things. That's why it's not a beginner session, but it's a kind of interesting way to approach this, right? So instead of using a series of slides, what you can do is put those images on slide layers. And then, even if you had this as images on slide layers, you still have access to this approach, which is the light box approach, which I don't have linked up. And you would just have to, everything we did on this progress layer, you would have to do on that trophy slide. So you're using the true false variables to evaluate whether or not you collected something. And so you could do that as a lightbox slide, whether you use a series of slides or use a layer. If you want to have a persistent layer like this is one way to do it. The other way you could do that is what I would say is just expose your base layer. So what we're doing here on this first slide is we have the image taking up the entire slide. But if I didn't take up the entire slide and I moved this image a little bit, I have my base layer here, and it gives me a few options. So we're not going to go rebuild everything, but you'll see how this works. So I created a start layer, and then this right here is my base layer, and all I did was move the slide, the 360 image, I cropped it down. So now I have my 360 image, but I can have my persistent layer on my base layer, and then I can even build other navigation. So I don't have to have the navigation built in here, right? I can create buttons or tabs or whatever I want to do. And then I can just put my progress meter or bar up here. And all you're really doing with that is, if we insert a slide, let's insert a slide. This will be the last, oops, God, my mouse here. Insert a slide. All right, so we're gonna insert a slide. We're gonna insert that 360 image, right? So we do that. And the only thing you need to do is just change the dimensions of it. So you don't have to have it take up the entire slide. So if I preview this slide, you know, I've got now all this space available. I like this approach best because I can build a really nice looking dock and tabs interaction, whatever I want to do, and make it persistent. And it's always going to be available. And I'm not having to create these nuanced triggers where I'm opening up a layer on top of a layer. So I like this. Of all the three options, the Lightbox slide, that layer that floats on top of the other layer, or this one where I just kind of move the image down a little, I like this third one the best way because it just gives me a space. It's on the base layer. I don't have to do a bunch of other layers and a lot of the nuance to that. And again, you're not limited to this. I mean, you could do something like this. Let's see how this looks. Let me insert another 360 image. Maybe you want to compare rooms, right? And like one room is messy, one room is clean. You know, you can do all sorts of things with that. Let's just see what it looks like with two images in here. We'll assume these are the same size. So a lot of things you can do once you kind of know how this works. So you can see I'm not limited to just one image. I have progress meters. So I can, I can do the escape room without having to jump back and forth. A lot of options there. Like I said, the thing with Storyline is there's a lot of ways to approach this. Is just 3 ways. There's a lot of nuance to this, so it's not something we would expect a new person to do, but you've got the video to learn about the 360 images and everything you can do there. I'll put the link to the video for the true false variables, and David said we're doing that webinar, I think, coming up next week as well. So cool idea, a lot of ways to approach this. Hopefully you learned something in there, learn some troubleshooting as well. And if you have questions, I'll jump in after David takes over and I can answer some of those questions.
So let's give that a second to pop up. And real quick, while I'm doing this, I just want to call attention. I am working in the Storyline 64-bit beta version. This is available to all of you if you have a trial or active subscription. So you can actually run both of these together. I find this is really helpful. So I have the beta version, which is running here, and then I also have my default version. I find, especially since I work on it says it's already going here. First one to help me find my beginner session. I got it, I win. I find that the 64-bit works really well. I'm running everything through an older MacBook, and I just find the performance is amazing. But you have access to that. There's also the report bug if you want to provide any feedback or anything that you see that's happening. But we're continuously updating. We just added screen recording to the beta, to the 64-bit beta. So you have pretty much all the same functionality at this point. I don't remember if we have webcam yet. Let's just see. This is like a sidetrack. No, we don't have webcam video yet in here, but I think just about everything else is now part of the beta. So the idea is, if I look at this file, we just have a module 1, a module 2, and a final assessment. And the idea is each of these has to be completed before the learner can move on. So in this first scene, let's just jump into scene 1 right here. I've got 4 quiz questions. 4 is always easy to work with when you're testing because you can easily divide that right in quarters. So 75%, 80, 100%, 25, 50, and so on. So the idea is I want to put a knowledge check in here. So knowledge checks are not graded. These aren't passed to the LMS, but they are a way to provide some feedback to let learners know how they're doing at any point in the course. They don't have to be at the end of a scene. Typically, it's just a common way to put them at the end of a scene. A scene is like a way to organize your content, but you could put them in the middle of the course. It doesn't matter where they go. But I want to add a results slide, and I'm going to make this a knowledge check, which means it's not that I want to grade and score, but I do want the learner to know how they're doing. So with this, I can go to slides and just add a results slide, and I'll keep it basic by just working with the built-in, because the content library slides, which are nicer designed, they have all the features already added. So I just want to focus on what it looks like at the sort of the bare minimum default version. So when I insert that slide, when I insert the slide with questions in a scene, Storyline's automatically going to detect that, and will quickly select all of the question slides, the graded question slides you have. That's really cool. Storyline thinks that's what you want to do, but you don't have to, meaning that you could deselect one or more of those questions and not include them. If you're wondering why didn't Storyline automatically include Module 2? Well, we're only on Module 1, so in theory, the learner wouldn't have seen the questions in Module 2, but we make that option available. Well, why? Well, what if you're creating some type of branching project where the learner is bouncing between different scenes? Well, then they would have seen, right? They would have seen some of those questions. So if you are creating a nonlinear project, then you can include those question slides anywhere else in the project and use those for your results slide. But the way this is set up in those columns, or those linear columns, the Storyline the learner wouldn't have seen anything past this first module. So those 4 questions, that works for me. I'll click OK. Well, actually, what I'm going to do is make this 75%, because that would be tough with 80 with only 4 questions. Just to make it easy, let's just divide everything into quarters, and I'll click OK. So that adds my quick knowledge check, but we want to look at some options here for what happens if they fail. So when you're working a Storyline, this is sort of just general troubleshooting, general exploration, general workflow in Storyline. If you're using any of the default result slides, default questions, or content library, you want to check out what's on the slide layers, because you may not always see how these are working on the default slide. Meaning, I'm on the base layer, and if you look down here, you'll see that's where we are, the base layer, but I don't see how's the score being generated, right? That's kind of a head scratcher, because I don't see any type of variables or dynamic placeholders. Well, let's check out the slide layers. These are all set up a little differently. So we did that intentionally as a way to provide guided education and instruction to you, to show you different ways that you can approach this. There isn't just a one way to work. So you think, okay, why are they always different? Well, the defaults are built a certain way. The content library slides have different ways that they're built, because it's a way to see different approaches. So if I click the success layer, now I can see where those placeholders for the scores and the points are created. Here's a review option with a button. You think, well, what does that review button do? What does that mean to review? Well, I would just look over now in the triggers and see what are the triggers that are set up for that. So this is a way to just play around and kind of explore what these options are and the different ways that you can hide or place or set up your slides. Sometimes it's nice to have it all on one slide, but sometimes that gets a little bit messy. So it's easier to use slide layers to categorize or hold that content. So we're saying review the results when user clicks. Now this has some built-in functionality too, because review is going to now highlight the correct and incorrect choices and so on. Well, on a success layer, on the success layer, we don't need to force them to retake anything. So if we have the player navigation, they can click the next button, or on the success layer, you could add a button that says, hey, carry on, good job. Where did my button go? Right, continue. And then just add that trigger that says jump to next slide, which is basic functionality for simple quiz questions. Now you can add it to the results slide. I believe this has the player button on it already, or actually I don't know, because I don't see it here on this slide. But anyway, that they can move forward. But let's take a look at the result at the failure layer, which means they did not pass. And what do we have? Well, at this point, we're jumping back to the beginning. That's the retry quiz option. So that's already set up for you on the result slide. You don't have to do anything. So if I fail this question, if I fail these 4 questions and get to the result slide, I click the retry quiz button, and it's doing a couple things. It's going to let me reset the results and then jump to the next slide. Now, if you didn't have this button on here, you can add maybe add your own. And these are all triggers that you have access to. So if you're working with a custom slide and you think, well, I saw that you could do the retry where it resets the results and then it jumps to slide, you could create your own button and then use the built-in triggers, right, to reset and retry the quizzes. So this is all available right here from the trigger wizard. So you can grab that. So at this point, it would take me back up to from the result slide back to the top, and I can't move forward. Now, there are ways that you could say, well, I'm only going to give you 2 tries, and then I'm just going to fail you, right? So we could do that with a counter, our own custom variable, using a number variable, something like that. But that's the basic feature there. So we could do the same thing for module 2. You can't move from module 1 to module 2. You can't move from module 2 to the final without it. The final assessment's a little different because we want to use that result slide as really the gate to whether or not the learner completes the course. So we'll put in another slide again. This time we'll just say same thing, result slide. And I'll do this one as a graded results. And I want to choose final assessment. So final assessment means what are we tracking? It thinks we're tracking these, which is fine if it's all within the same slide. However, what if there was another scene, a single scene? So it was module 1, 2, and 3, and then we got to that final slide, and then we wanted to see a final assessment. So when I add that quiz result slide, Storyline's not going to know what to choose. So we have options here to then select all of the questions, right, for each module. We could select them all one by one, or we could just select that last quiz option for final assessment 3. Now, another option, and this is not what the question was about, but this is one of the most overlooked uses of our result slide, is that's a lot of clicks to have to manage, and if you scroll too fast, maybe you miss an entire module. We don't have to calculate it for the questions. Instead, what we could do is calculate for result slides. So for every result slide you had in the course for module 1, 2, and 3, we could just wrap that up all together and make those what the learner has to be scored on. But the way this question was asked is, how do I get that final assessment graded so that that's what's passed to my LMS, assuming that they complete the course, assuming they complete the quiz. So I'll say 75%, 25% weight in each for those, and now I have it. So let's take a look at the success and failure rates, success and layers again. That looks familiar, and that looks familiar as well. Now, for the success layer, so right now we're letting them retry the quiz and it just starts over and they have to keep going through. There's that loop. We could turn that off after a certain number of tries and just have them fail the course. But if it's a compliance-based course, then we certainly want to see that they pass that. All right, for the success, we can complete this a couple different ways. So if you wanted to have a couple extra slides after this, you could do that. So if I had another, just a blank slide after this, a content slide, maybe you want to have a finish course button, right? So you could say insert another button, and then it could be a course completion trigger. I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble selecting. So complete course or exit course, something like that. And then there's also this option to complete course. So it's a complete course trigger. So that's how we can complete it that way, or Storyline can just recognize that this final assessment has been passed or completed, whether it's failed or passed, and then that's how we track. And the way we do that is just go to the publish settings, and then you're going to look for your tracking. The cool thing here for us as Storyline designers is that we don't have a lot of options, and that's a good thing, meaning that there's no code, there's no place to go in and tweak the manifest files or any of that we used to have to a long time ago. Instead, we just have to select the type of recording that we're tracking, click the tracking and reporting, and then most importantly, the tracking. What is it we want to use to track? So here's the option. We aren't using slides completed. That doesn't make sense for this question. So instead, we want to say, what is it we want when the learner completes? So it looks like I might have accidentally set that to a knowledge, the final assessment. So you would select your final assessment as the way to complete it, or using a trigger the complete course. So these will happen whichever one happens first. Obviously, the quiz is going to happen first, so it would automatically show complete, but there still could be some additional content slides that you want to show. But that's how, and that's what's passed. It's not recognizing the other knowledge checks that we have in the project. So that's how you can ensure that the learner has to complete everything, which is a really common requirement in e-learning, right? Okay, so there's that one. And then we had another question come up. This is really simple. I'm not even going to go through a lot of this, but just how do I add emojis? That seems to, I'll tell you what, when Ginger shows that, or when Elizabeth used to do that before, or taught, whenever we show emojis, it's like you could show all of the cool branching, all of the theme customization, but then you see it in emoji, of course, how they do that? What's the shortcut? Well, real quick, I just added the links to our resource page so you can find that. Tom has a few blog posts on it as well, but you could say that just there's a couple shortcuts for Mac and PC. There's a couple places. I think Ginger always likes the file format. I like EmojiDB just because I can kind of see all the pictures, right? So Rocket or something, and then you just select it, and then you can copy and paste it like you would a text link. So that's how you can do. That's how you can quickly add the emojis to your projects. Continuing here, I think we have. All right, let me do this real quick since I'm on this page. This one came up because we just had custom blocks in Rise, and there's always a question around which are the accessible components, which blocks are accessible in Rise, which ones are not. So I just want, this is probably worth bookmarking. Just bookmark this page. This gets updated all the time. We updated it a month ago to include updates that we make to the accessible blocks. But this shows you the current mostly accessible and fully accessible, currently inaccessible, all the way to fully accessible blocks. So you know what you're getting into as you build your course. So if this is by far the most important part of your training development is to have everything be fully accessible, then maybe you just create a style guide or a block template or in Rise with the accessible blocks only, and that's how you start really structure your course to ensure that no one else on the team is working with any of those inaccessible blocks. But again, these are getting updated all the time, so please just bookmark, check back, and you'll see some updates. All right, last one real quick, and that is on Motion Pass, and that's because I like this question that came up, and it was on someone's using an image, so whether it's a transparent image or a square image, I'm guessing it's a transparent image, and when they move that image over another object, the object is triggering too soon using the object intersect trigger, meaning that we can Storyline can detect when two objects pass over or under or touch each other. And it's especially true, that's why I assumed it was with a transparent image, because with transparent images, is this the right one? Nope, this is not the right one. With transparent images, it looks like the image is in a certain place, but it's actually a little bit bigger. So for example, this character has some additional transparency. Even though we don't see this, Storyline's going to recognize that as transparency, and that's the same with an object. So that wanted the character to get to a certain point and have that door open, and there's some, or have text or show a layer when it gets over that. So the way we usually do this is with hotspots. But if you just put the hotspot over exactly where the position is, meaning things are going to happen maybe a little bit too early. So if I leave the hotspots where they are, which is sort of what I would assume is the logical place to put them, I click go, and then the content might come up a little too early. And then when the character goes back, see how she's kind of overlaps with that content. This is where the hotspots just, I would say, nudge them over a little bit farther, and then you have better accuracy with them, and you can actually see the character gets more in position. At least the center of the character would be in place rather than having it over. So now when she gets right over the door, the content appears, and then the text disappears before. Maybe a better way to illustrate it would be this example where you have a solid image. If I turn off the hotspots, this is just one big background image, but you want to show this learner journey, and the character is going to go over each of these markers, and you want a slide layer maybe to appear. Well, the first instinct that I would have, right, is just to say, okay, well, let's put hotspots over each of these marker places, and then that's when things will trigger. So there's a trigger to say show a layer when the hotspot character interacts with each of those. The problem here is the timeline's going to stop, and look where our character is right there, right? And then it goes over the next one, and it's right in between. It almost looks like it's on the previous one. So it clearly doesn't indicate where you are, at least not specifically or very precisely. So in that case, the cool thing is, hopefully you play around with the timeline. We can now preview where objects are moving on the timeline. So you can kind of see as the path of that character. But also more importantly, we need to know that since this is an object with a transparency, and then the character is really the main part right here, not where the stick is, because that's what's putting him in between the characters. I want it more like this. So if I want that character directly over the marker on that flattened image, I just need to be a little bit more precise with my marker, with my hotspots. So I can put the hotspot right there where it's right, just touching that particular starting point for the character. And then the same thing for the rest of these, right? I can see where the character gets to maybe right about there. That's a good one. And then I would just keep going through, and just mostly these are just going to go in between because the character's about that size. So this should look a little bit more natural. So the hotspots are your friends. Hotspots are just invisible buttons, but notice how this is going to be a little bit more precise, and then you can kind of fine tune it. I probably need to move that over just a little bit farther and so on, but at least I can start to have control over that and not rely on the actual object itself. And this would hold true if these markers were individual objects that I had to move around. Then also it's going to trigger as soon as that object, that image starts to get placed over there. Okay, so these are just from last week's webinars. If you were in those, that's great. Otherwise, you can check out the recording. But these are the sort of production nuances of the tools. It's easy to get started, easy to get moving, but then there's well, how do I do this? I just want to do this. And that's kind of what these quick tip sessions are hopefully about, designed to be about, but hopefully they're finding that for you. All right, so with that, let's wrap up real quick and then talk about what's next. That is a lot of screen. Okay, so first and foremost, thank you for attending. We'll have that recording posted later today, so you'll have that to go back and rewatch. We always encourage you to try at least one of the things you saw, and if you get stuck or you have questions or just you want to expand on something we showed, then just post in the forums. You can either mention Tom or Dave, or just not even mention anyone, and someone will jump in and help you out. We always love, our favorite questions are, how did they do this? Or how did he do this? How did Tom build this? How did so-and-so do this? That's a great question to ask. For if no other reason, you're going to get 2 or 3 different responses usually in terms of approaches. And that's, I think, that those multiple contexts are really what makes you a better designer. If you learned something today, or you saw something you didn't even know was possible, whether you're a brand new user or you've been working in Storyline for a while or Rise for a while, hit us up on either Twitter or LinkedIn and just say, hey, I was in the quick tips today. I didn't even know I could do this. And first off, it's a good way to let us see what you're working on and kind of know where you are, but also it's a good way to connect with other folks in the community as well, building your professional network. So feel free to do that as well. You can connect with Tom or me, or even the company at Articulate. We all watch the Articulate, so you could even just mention the Articulate quick tip sessions, and we'll be happy to chime in on that. All right, thanks again. Thanks, Tom. Hope you enjoyed the session. If you have any feedback for us, just mention it. You can jump in the forum, so we'd be happy to follow up with you. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Tom, you have anything else? I should have asked you if you had anything.
Nope. If you have follow-up questions, just jump in the community. I saw there's a couple, 3 or 4 questions left hanging, but we got to drop off here. So we can answer those in the community.
Awesome. Yep. Look forward to seeing y'all there or somewhere or in our next session. Thanks. Enjoy the rest of your day.